You have questions, we have answers. Everybody, welcome back to the Menta Watches YouTube channel. Sitting with me today, our guest before he catches a flight back to Geneva, Mr. Sacha Davidoff of the Davidoff Brothers. If you've watched the channel, you are no stranger to this gentleman next to me. Before we move offices next week, we figured we would catch up on a Q&A session since we're always getting inundated with questions. So we asked you guys on Instagram to fire off your best questions, and we are here to answer them. Let's jump right into it. The first question, I think, is a little bit of a softball. It is most underrated vintage Rolex and vintage Patek. Why don't you kick us off?
So I think when talking about Rolex or Patek Philippe, it's very, very rare that you're going to find something that's underrated, undervalued, because those are the two most prominent vintage brands. Meanwhile, I think that if you track prices over the past, 5 years, I think that anything gilt era Rolex is undervalued and underappreciated at the moment because it's trading at prices that are lower than they used to be a few years ago. So if you can find a nice example, which is still very difficult, it would be a good time to, try to get into one of those models, the Submariner, GMT, Explorer of that gilt era. And then on the Patek Philippe side, I think a bit more difficult to find value today because the watches that I thought were kind of undervalued a couple of years ago, 3940, 3970, have really kind of exploded in more recent years. I can't come up with a single Patek Philippe right now that I don't think is at its market value that has major upside in the future. But if you're looking somewhere safe to park money, usually Rolex, Patek Philippe do well for you.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about the gilt era stuff. There are some fantastic deals to be had for 50s, 60s sports Rolex right now. But like you correctly pointed out, finding one in excellent condition is very difficult. And the excellent condition watches are still commanding top dollar. It's the okay, nice examples that are a little softer right now, which I think are great value buys. But for me, for vintage Rolex, I think there is a lot of great value. We know that the King Midases are sky high right now and super popular. A lot of people are overlooking the era right after the original three references, so right after the 9630, 3580, and 4350, which are the strap model, like a reference 4017, King Midas or Cellini model that have that cool larger size asymmetrical case.
Different color dials.
Different color dials. We just sold one with a burgundy dial. They're still under 10 grand, really cool watches not a lot of people are paying attention to. For Patek, I would say there's a lot of value in the 60s and 70s ellipses that are on integrated bracelets because they're not for everybody on an integrated bracelet. There is a lot of value. We have those cool double blue ones, 34 millimeter case on the website right now for $12,500. Solid gold watch, solid gold bracelet, very difficult to find. We have a white gold one with a cool blue dial for I think a hair under 10 grand. I think there's a lot of great value in there. And then the other thing
that goes for everything, then the upgraded bracelet versions of perpetual calendar chronograph, the two references I mentioned, 3940, 3970, have an integrated bracelet version, and that might be what you're meaning. That's where the value is.
Yeah, because 3945 is cheaper than a 3940 in essence a lot of times.
Yeah, where the retail price was much higher.
Correct. And I also think there's a lot of great value just to throw in a bonus round. People really don't talk about a lot, not that they're cheap now, but the Beta 21 era Pateks, you get this really large size wristwatch that Patek was not really known for, some on strap, some on integrated bracelet that a lot of people don't look at, and cool quartz watch. They're not cheap, usually starting in the 20 grand price point.
Kind of like a Texano Rolex.
Yeah, like a Texano Rolex, but actually very rare. They made some interesting dials, some really interesting bracelets, like those serrated bracelets.
Cheese, whatever they call them, bracelets.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of value in those too. Okay, next question is, will precious metal watches become more sought after in the future, or will stainless steel continue to dominate the market? Well, I think we're already seeing the rising tide of precious metal watches. I don't think stainless steel watches already dominate or still dominate the market. There is a lot of interest in precious metal watches. A lot of people are willing to dip their toes into precious metal and wearing gold watches, wearing platinum watches, wearing white gold. And I've seen a lot of interest, whereas even on our site, we're now more willing to offer a lot more precious metal watches versus just focusing on stainless steel. What have you noticed?
I think that with the gold price right now almost getting to $3,000 an ounce, people are paying attention to precious metals as a value because that has an impact on the newer watches. So if you look at the disparity of price between a vintage gold watch, take a Daytona 16528, and compare it to a brand new yellow gold Daytona, you're finding there's a $20,000 spread, and the value in the vintage is kind of really drawing people more towards a vintage watch. But there are people that would have bought a gold watch anyways. It's not that that's just because the vintage ones offer a better value, that like, oh, all of a sudden I'm going to be into gold watches. That's just been a general trend of the market, where we used to only be able to sell stainless steel sports watches, generally on bracelets. You know, we've seen in past years that we've been able to attract a clientele that now is more interested in dress watches. So that's Cartier, Patek Philippe Calatravas, more of the classics, you know, 70s Calatrava or funky style cases from like Vacheron, AP, and other brands. But I think that we have a more well-rounded showcase now. It's not just like all, you know, subs and Speedmasters. Yeah.
So I'll give a personal anecdote as well. I generally, historically, have not felt comfortable wearing a full gold watch. I always thought insecurely that I looked tacky, so I would wear, if I did wear a gold watch or a pressed metal watch, it'd be on a strap. And I was sitting with a client several months ago, and I told him that. I was like, I just sometimes really just don't feel comfortable in my own skin wearing a full gold watch. And he's like, listen, that's main character syndrome. Like, you think it looks tacky, but no one else thinks that. And it kind of like, you know, after years of collecting watches and wearing watches, it kind of like a light bulb went off, and I warmed up to wearing more full gold watches, and I have put more of them in my rotation. And I think a lot of people are coming around on their comfort level as it relates to precious metal watches.
I agree with that. What are you wearing?
This is a platinum Jules Audemars Tourbillon.
Oh, perfect. Platinum Urban Jurgensen on the strap.
There you go.
Well done.
Okay. Next question. What are the spots to look at when authenticating a dial, parentheses, original dial, redial, and or double signed? Obviously, that's a conversation for a much larger video. The best piece of advice that I could give you if you're not an expert on any particular watch and you're looking to buy something is to do as much research as you can as possible. Compare online to known examples, make sure the fonts match up, make sure the texture of the lume matches up, make sure the signature, if it's a co-signed dial, matches up to other known, confirmed, and sold examples, maybe in a public auction, maybe on one of our websites that people know and accept as original. It is always best to ask for advice if you are not sure. Never be afraid to double check, especially when you're about to drop a large sum of money on a watch that you are unsure about. And as always, if you are still unsure, make sure you're buying from a reputable source where if something is wrong, you have the ability to return it. Generally speaking though, this stuff takes years and years and years of experience, mistakes, research, and education to really truly become an expert at what you are looking at. So it's not so simple, unfortunately, to be able to explain it in a quick YouTube video. Maybe in the future, you and I could sit down and show the audience what we're looking for specifically, but that's a much longer video.
Like I said earlier, I think that each dial requires, each brand and era requires a different specialty or expertise. And so you first, if you're going to refer to somebody else, make sure that it's something that they sell or they've seen or have experience with. And that kind of like helps you when you're looking at things that are counterintuitive. So if you're looking at something that's like a Tiffany signed Daytona from the 70s, that Tiffany signature is going to look to the untrained eye, it's going to look a bit sloppy, and it might even look fake. The sloppy one's the real one, and the one that's too neat is actually not the real one. So you have to have the experience and the knowledge to be able to assess which one's real, which one's not. You also have to have the kind of financial means to be able to sell this type of watch, and if anything is ever wrong with it, take it back. So when you're paying a little bit more from a trusted dealer than you would maybe find this watch from like, you know, an individual on a forum, just always remember that you're just paying a little extra for an insurance policy for when something might, you know, eventually go wrong, and it's always worth, you know, the peace of mind.
In short, just do as much homework as humanly possible. And like I said, and I cannot reiterate enough, never be afraid to seek out advice and help. It is your money. Make sure you are spending it wisely and you are comfortable with the purchase you are making. Okay, next question. This is a good one. The Miami Watch Club asks, is the Miami watch scene better than New York? I told you I would answer the question. I told you you are not going to like the answer. Absolutely not yet. The New York watch scene, in addition to the Los Angeles watch scene, are absolutely fantastic for vintage watches and modern as well. They are very diverse. They are very welcoming, and not that Miami isn't, but they have these large established groups that have been meeting regularly for years. They're welcoming of all kinds of collectors. I've been to get-togethers in New York where a guy rolls in wearing a $500,000 Journe, and then the next guy walks in wearing the latest Moon Swatch, and they're both just as excited to see each other's watches. The vintage scene in New York and Los Angeles, I would say, are the strongest in the country. Miami, we are up and coming. There are a lot of great collectors down here, and the Miami Watch Club, follow them at mia.watch.club on Instagram, we'll link it below, is a fantastic group of guys that we've met several times now, and we're going to do some events with, that are creating and building the scene here in Miami. Generally speaking, Miami, in my experience, grown up here my entire life and lived here most of my life, is very transient. So you get a lot of people coming down here for vacation and tourism, snowbirds, and so the scene has never been completely stable. And it's also a scene where people love to go out on South Beach or to Brickell or whatever and flash their latest and greatest modern watch, not being so much as a watch guy necessarily.
I think that's the most important takeaway, is that Miami's watch scene might be, you know, pretty developed, but the vintage watch, you know, scene is really kind of still needs a little bit of a help growing. I was very impressed at how many people from, you know, MA Watch Club or other kind of vintage collectors came to our last vintage watch get together during Miami Beach Antique Show.
Which, by the way, you could watch if you click here.
You know, how many vintage watches were on wrist, how many women are getting into the, you know, watch collecting world, both vintage and modern. It is very exciting. There's the market is changing in a good way, and I think that we have a lot more eyeballs on vintage than we used to, which is great. It's just kind of like, you know, do we have the capacity to find enough nice vintage watches for everybody? Hopefully that's like the best problem to have. But
I'll say this, the uptick in locals asking me to come to the office to see watches, to meet, to hang out, pendulum has swung up a lot in the past couple of years than it has, let's say, in the past decade. So it's certainly growing, and you guys are doing a fantastic job. Shout out to the Miami Watch Club. The next question is, hello, big fan of your content and your taste in vintage watches. Recently, I've been on the lookout for cheaper, parentheses, sub $5,000 personality pieces, so to speak, and I'm wondering if you've ever thought about having a section on your website for niche, funky vintage finds that align with your taste. It's a tricky question to answer. Yes, we have always wanted to do that, to have a sub $5,000 or sub $10,000 section on the website. And hopefully, as our new intern who's interned for us for a couple years joins the fold in the summer, shout out to Darren, we will able to start incorporating that. As it is right now, and for our business and the employees that we have, it is sadly too much work to constantly update the site with those watches. And to be quite frank, the margins on sub $5,000 watches sometimes make it a losing proposition to list on the website and sell, because it's not like we can magically find these watches for $1,000 and sell them for $3,000. Usually we find them for $2,500 and sell them for $2,800, and after shipping, photography, employees, expenses, all that stuff, it doesn't make any sense to do that. So it's not that we don't have any love for those watches, and we do try to sprinkle them in here and there when we are updating the website, which is only twice a month in relation, which is a small amount in relation to the amount of watches we actually sell. It's usually we're focusing on, you know, let's say 10,000 and up of price point watches, but do be on the lookout. That is something that I've been wanting to incorporate for a very, very long time, and it is something that we will hopefully actually get around to doing in the near future. What about you?
yeah, I find the same. I don't think you really need a dealer to buy those types of watches, because you can do the homework on your own. The risk that you run of redone dials and things like that in the lower end is usually much smaller, because it's, again, not worthwhile to intervene on a watch of that price range. What that's going to require of you is doing a little bit more homework on your end, because the chances that you'll see one pop up on our website where we're, you know, able to bring added value to that watch is rarer and rarer. Doesn't mean that they don't exist, and there are tons of cool watches from like the, you know, 1,500 range all the way up to 5,000. 5,000, you're getting like a real watch. Like, you know, it's not like a
even 1,500, you're getting a real watch.
Yeah,
There's a lot of great stuff in that price point. You know, I've always been proud of the fact that we will sell anything, whether it's $500 or $5 million. A cool watch is a cool watch. And, you know, again, for our business, sadly right now, based on the manpower we have, it does not make sense. We're hoping to change that. If you are interested in those kind of watches, we're absolutely happy to give you a great list of recommendations to other dealers and other websites you could check out. Just drop us an email. Okay, next question we have is, this is a little bit of a personal one. Did turning your passion into a job affect your love for vintage watches in the long run? Simply put, absolutely not. It's really strange, and I'd be the first to admit, you know, like, hey, listen, the fact is this is a business, and we do need to sell watches to keep the lights on, to pay employees, etc. That being said, every day still feels like Christmas to me. Every time Jordan comes in with packages or something gets delivered to the office, I'm very excited to see what it is, to see what the condition's like. Obviously, there are certain watches that come in the door, I'm happy to have and get. Obviously, the excitement isn't quite there because we've just seen so many of them. A basic matte dial 1675 GMT Master. Not quite as exciting when it comes in anymore, unless it's something in absolute spectacular condition or a cool fuchsia bezel or something like that. But there are so many watches that we are always so happy to hunt down and see and find and own and collect. So, I know I personally started life as a collector. I think you did as well.
Yes.
So that passion hasn't really left. I still absolutely love what I do. I can't imagine doing anything else. So even though it is a business, it's still incredibly fun, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be in the position that I'm in.
I think that ever since I've been a dealer, my access, because, I buy a lot of watches, Adam buys like 10 times more probably, but my access to certain of these pieces would have never been possible. First of all, if I wasn't a dealer, I would have never even had like the chance to buy these watches. Second, there's very few things that I could do in my life to continue to afford collecting on the side. I couldn't afford the watches and the hobby as my knowledge base kind of grew. I just wasn't making enough money essentially to collect the watches that I would have loved to own at some point in my life. Once I owned a watch, I don't really mind selling it as much. So it's more of like about the hunt. And so that's what I do. I get to hunt, really, really rare watches, and that's what I really enjoy. And I've been able to basically make that into a business. Not always profitable, but we do our best. And
I absolutely still adore the hunt, but I actually also adore the ownership process and being able to look down on my wrist and know, okay, this isn't for inventory, this is just for me. But I am easily persuaded, and when I have a client or a friend who really, really wants something in my personal collection, I hate saying no to people, so it usually ends up getting sold.
one day or another, I always give in. Always.
I think that will parlay with our next question that I recalled seeing on the list. What is a watch that got away or that you regret selling and can turn back time on pricing to recapture it? One that got away is very simple for me. The one that springs to mind the most is the 2526 Patek Philippe Calatrava Platinum, Tiffany & Co. It ended up getting auctioned by Heritage Auctions. This was in 2017. I was supposed to buy that watch privately. I flew to Texas to buy it. Whole longer story for another day. That's the one that got away. There are so many that I've sold that I absolutely regret selling. In recent memory, the last two that spring to mind just off the top of my head was the Movado M90 chronograph with a black gilt dial that I sold to my dear friend Kevin Odell. I sold it to him and he's a good friend, so at least I know where that one is. And then there was also a Vacheron Constantin chronograph in rose gold with a pink on pink pulsation style, rose gold bracelet, box papers from the 1940s, an absolutely brand new condition. It sold to a fantastic collector, specifically a Vacheron in California. It went to an absolutely great home, but I absolutely regret selling it. What about you?
So I always had this fear of selling at auction or selling to museums, for example, because I would never get to see a watch again, essentially, that it would be gone and I would never know where it is. Luckily, the watches that I regret selling the most, I think, ended up with collectors that I know where that watch is. It's the Speedmaster, obviously. So Speedmaster from 1978 with a radial dial and a star watch case. I was able to track down one of the 4 prototypes that do not belong to the US government. They made 60 watches in 1978, 56 were issued to the government, and 4 prototypes left that stayed at the factory. And they have a part number, but they don't have a SN on them. So they're like no serial number, exactly. And those watches there's only 4, and 3 have traded. So I've sold one, Philip sold one, Sotheby's sold one. So presumably there's like one of them out there left, but that watch was a kind of a once in a lifetime find. And the fact that I vetted it through the Omega Museum, who was like very like, oh, send me the number, I have to check if this doesn't belong, if the FBI is not going to come after you or whatever. And also just studying the configuration. I mean, the case is all like satin finish. That was required of a Star Watch case. It had no Swiss made on the dial, and it was made by an American company, the case, because there was a Buy American Act in place at the time. And so basically to get the Appropriations Department to approve it for NASA, US government agency, they basically had to use like American parts and just kind of sneak it in basically into the purchasing department, that it was like a partly American made watch. But that's one of the craziest watches I have ever found. and sold, and at least I still know where it is, and I can go visit it if the urge.
Thank you for the history lesson.
If the urge is needed.
Well, it's good you brought up a Speedmaster that you let go. The next question is, and I'll let you kick off with the answer, what are your thoughts on the Speedy market, seeing a rebound, and did we hit bottom? Seems like a great time to buy as a true collector versus a speculator.
Okay, so yes, price-wise, I think that the prices have gone to where, I mean, you're talking about like 6-7 years back, partially related to the Omega scandal, partially related to the fact that the entire market kind of cooled off. So this wasn't limited to Speedmasters.
I also think because they're not issuing extracts at present and haven't been for some time, people are much more
not
skeptical.
helping. It's like a
It's not
perfect
helping.
storm
It's a
of
perfect
like
storm. Yeah.
of consequences. However, when I have a request for like a really nice 321 Speedmaster, can't find one. So it's not like that easy. It's like we were talking about the Gilt era stuff. Like the really, really, really nice ones still get good prices. It's just not so easy to find them in like perfect condition.
Well, I think the problem is you have a lot of people who bought while the Omega Speedy market was on fire and strong.
don't wanna take a
and
loss.
they don't want to sell for less money, but then the new buyer entering the fold also doesn't want to pay that top price. You're not able to bridge that gap and source the watch.
Like an original owner Speedy come out. We used to get them like, you know, once a week almost, like coming out of the market. And like now they're just not coming up because I think people are like, oh, it's not a good time to sell.
I mean, but for me and in our business here, we get offered a lot of Speedmasters, and I would say we pass on 80% of them. Two main reasons. Number one, condition is just not good, and we don't like to buy them if they're not in good condition or original or have replaced parts, and we have to source the correct parts, and etc. Or B, the price is just too high, and people are living in the past. Like, for example, right now, just before we started filming, we were offered a fresh 2915 tube, but with a base 1000 bezel, not the steel bezel. So
Black one instead of
black
steel one, yeah.
instead of steel bezel. So technically on the cusp of not being correct, with all the lume missing from the hands, but on the original bracelet, etc., etc. And they were asking $85,000, and that is a price that we probably would have jumped at in 2018, 2019. But now it's not even in the same ballpark of what we would consider purchasing it for, especially as a project when you need to try to source an unobtainable part in that steel bezel. So I think some people are looking at old auction prices and not understanding that the market has shifted downwards. But to answer his question, I believe it is absolutely, and I've been saying it for about a year now, a fantastic time to buy. If you are a collector and looking for a nice Speedmaster, you absolutely can find a great 321 if you are patient. Maybe not an Ed White, but a twisted lug 321, so 65 to 67. Around the 10K mark, maybe if on bracelet it's going to be a little bit higher and it's absolutely perfect, maybe 12, 13. But that's a watch that would have cost you close to 20 not long ago, versus now you could find them in that, let's say, 7 to 12K range, in varying degrees of condition and originality. But even for a nice one, you still can pick them up in the 7, 8K range, I feel like. Maybe not 10 out of 10, but a nice one that we would stock,
Yeah, no, I think that it's a good time. If you can find one, I think it's a good time. And I haven't had any trouble selling them when I can source them. It's just that I think that, as you were saying earlier, people don't want them go, especially nice ones, at a loss.
Right.
They're just like, I wait it out. It's a nice watch. I'll hold on to it.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah, I think at the higher end of the market, so the 2915s of the world, the early 2998s, a lot of the specialty Speedmasters, the racing dials, etc., the market has dropped and it might be a little bit more difficult to find a buyer, but there is still a market at least. It's just not as strong as it was.
There is a buyer, because I've been selling this stuff, but it's just a buyer who understands that there's an opportunity right now to buy them cheaper than they have in the past 8 years, and so they're like, at that price, well, I'll jump in because I know it's rare enough where I might not be able to get one for the next foreseeable future. And by the time they do pop back up, the prices might have gone up.
Yeah, and this stuff's cyclical. We've seen the Speedmaster market go up and down several times. It's not 12 years ago when the market exploded during, what was this sale called?
No, it was in 2007, it's even longer. The
What was
Omega
this?
Mania.
And the market shot up and then cooled off for a while and then shot up again, 6-7 years ago, and now it's cooled off again. It's all cyclical. So I think it's a matter of time. And this is not a guarantee, but it's a matter of time before prices start to creep up and collectors revisit the Speedmaster or vintage Speedmaster
It's been the
market.
trend for decades, you know what I mean? It goes kind of like in waves, but like slowly but surely it kind of goes up. If something goes up too quickly and too much, and you think it doesn't make sense, then just don't buy it.
Yeah.
Like don't adhere to it. There's other stuff to buy.
As always, buy what you like first. Obviously, it's hard these days, especially to completely put aside the investment or value aspect of purchasing a watch. That being said, your primary focus should always be on buying a watch that you enjoy and like, and not speculating.
Correct.
And our final question of the day, I think, is a good one that is worth talking about. Or why does Perezcope have little support from the industry? It's a little vague. I think he means industry as in like all of us. So
I
I'm
thought he
good.
meant brands, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so let's break it down. First, so if you don't know, Perezcope is the Instagram account associated with Jose Perez. Jose is a passionate collector and has also been a passionate detective for the past several years, doing very in-depth research and exposing lots of different vintage watch scandals and vintage watch offerings that are maybe not passing the smell test or have issues that are undisclosed by various dealers, auction houses, brands.
Started off as a passionate Panerai collector and scholar.
Right. So I would say from my perspective, I guess there's a couple different things to talk about here. If what your read on the question is brands, I think the brands are not going to support him simply because he's usually attacking them. So they're not going to support anybody who might be affecting their bottom line. And I think that goes on a broader level to why the industry isn't supporting him. If you think of the industry as being guys like us, auction houses, etc., is because in their view, and not necessarily in ours, because we've talked about this a lot, in their view, or in lots of people's view, is that he's casting a negative shadow over the industry when he calls attention to these problematic watches. Now, in my opinion, he is doing a lot of fantastic things for the industry. It needs to be some checks and balances. There needs to be somebody out there calling bullshit on a lot of the watches that come to market that are maybe not disclosed properly or just outright fraudulent, like the Omega scandal, the 2915 scandal.
Yes.
That being said, the only problem I've ever found is that you look at the comments and a lot of people are like brigadiering and they pile on and they think that because this auction house had one bad watch that all vintage watches must be bad. And it's usually that it's such a salacious story that it becomes like front and center news, and kind of people lose sight of the fact that like not all of these watches are like that. There are these instances, of course, absolutely, and it's not just watches, it's cars, it's art, it's baseball cards, it's Pokemon cards,
But he has a lot of clickbait. Like the recent stuff that he's posted, I think that certain things that he's posted in like a very, like he showed like the case, you know, like little scratches that he recognized on one watch like 6 years ago was the same actual watch, and yada 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 in the past, calling out all different auction houses. I thought that was interesting, and I thought that like, okay, you know, he really did the research there. More recently, it's been more like casting a shadow of a doubt without really nailing down anything. I thought it was a bit vague, and I thought it was just more kind of, you know, trying to make people afraid or cautious of buying at certain auction houses or buying from certain people. And I think that like when you cast a negative shadow on anything, you're going to have basically closed doors from all brands.
Right.
Because they're in the world of luxury. Luxury equals positivity, optimism, happiness, good feelings.
Aspiration.
Yeah. So everything should be kind of like a more joyous side of things, which has led to a lot of criticism on watch press over the years.
Yeah.
Because they only just like, you know, regurgitate happy.
It's all flowery. Yeah. It's all flowery.
They're not like, you know what? I think
Rose-colored glasses. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that last design was like was great. I think the movement they use is really not the greatest quality. I don't like you do that, you're like blacklisted forever, you know. Right. So I think that he does take a risk in that sense, but he should also just like know that he's not going to be like hired by Panerai to be their like, you know, historian and consultant.
Sure.
Just because he's also like really hurt Panerai a lot in terms of like the vintage Paneristi, you know, auction market, where he was like, that watch is wrong, that watch is wrong, these guys don't know what they're talking about, yada yada yada. It's not very helpful, you know what I mean? There was like maybe a more finesse way of, you know, kind of handling that, but
I mean, listen, I think
his way of doing things.
I think some of the stuff he puts out there, the research is top notch, second to none. His articles are very well written out. I do think sometimes he takes it a little far with the personal attacks on some people, and he gets a little, you know, emotional as it relates to certain individuals. Yeah. And it should be only about the watches and the problems with those watches, or the problems with those brands, or the problems with those auction houses, and not attacking somebody on a personal level. I think he is absolutely a necessary evil for the industry to keep the people and auction houses and brands in line. I think they're always, whether it's watches or like I said, any other collectible or any other industry, there needs to be checks and balances. I think he deserves more support, and I wish him the best. I think obviously maybe just button it up a little bit on the personal attacks.
Well, you heard it here, Jose. He said you're evil, so.
I said necessary
If
evil.
you're looking for your next victim.
Well, guys, that about wraps it up for this Q&A. We're going to be taking a week or two off as we move to a new office, which we are very excited to see. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, anything you could do to help us get in front of more people on YouTube. Thanks so much, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.
¿Es eso Reebok o son Nike? Why is he looking at his sugar packets right? Are you looking at the sugar right now? Like, were you looking around the sugar packets? Like, what do you need? Condiments?
Listen, you don't have all the tools here. We had to work with what we got. You know what I'm saying?
Dude, this is the most like ghetto setup.
That's why I'm buying everything. It's the next office. I'm buying everything. I don't care.
What is it?
Walking eyes will be right down. No need to scream, okay? We're all using our inside voice now.
Jordan, I could hear you like in the back.
Shut up, Jordan.
Go, go, go.
Go, 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 as he continues to back it up.
I can see him in the reflection taping, and she's like, go, 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 it's fine. You know, gold dress watch from the...
God damn it, guy.
Okay, so...
Guy, are you good?
I got some good bloopers.
Are you sure? That's all Guy cares about.